Well, after 5 years away, Formula One's return to China provided one of the most entertaining races this season, with 2 safety cars, 1 VSC, alternating pit strategies and plenty of overtaking over the course of the 56-lap race, and thankfully the grass didn't catch fire. However, it was Max Verstappen who drove away from the pack to claim his first win in China and his 4th win of the season, his 58th career victory. Well, let's have a look at the result. And as I say, it was Max Verstappen who won by a comfortable margin, almost 14 seconds ahead of the McLaren. Surprise result for Lando Norris. Sergio Perez coming home 3rd in the 2nd Red Bull. Then the 2 Ferrari of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz in 4th and 5th respectively. George Russell bringing the Mercedes home in 6th. Fernando Alonso, after a fantastic qualifying, fell down the order. He finished 7th. Then it was Oscar Piastri with some damage, bringing his McLaren home in 8th. Lewis Hamilton recovering from 18th on the grid to finish 9th. And the points rounded out by Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas. Further afield, the 2 Alpines, Ocon and Gasly, 11th and 13th, sandwiching the Williams of Alexander Albon. Then it was the Sauber of Zhou Guanyu, to the delight of the locals. Lance Stroll in 15th, Kevin Magnussen 16th and Logan Sargent 17th, the last of the finishers, with Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda and Valtteri Bottas all DNFs. Hello, I'm Bryn Lucas, and joining me over in China we have John Noble, and from his house in the UK, Jake Boxall-Legge, always aka JBL. Gents, first of all, welcome. How are you, John?
It's the classic flyaway, bit of a paddock cough, unfortunately. There's a fair few coughs going around the paddock. Inevitable part of flying and travelling and places we go to. So unfortunately, if I break conversation for a small cough, you can look away.
JBL, can you just put your tiny violin down and answer how you are as well, please?
I'm very good. I think I had my bout of the paddock lurgy in Australia. So clearly someone gave it to me and I've passed it on before leaving Australia, and it's made its merry way to Japan and China. So, John, I apologise for my part in this.
Thank you very much.
You left it there for him to pick up. You lovely, lovely person. Now, we've got a lot to get through and not a huge amount of time. And seeing as we haven't actually touched upon the sprint race at all this weekend, let's kick off with the sprint race. First sprint race of the season. A lot of drivers saying that it was kind of stupid to have the first sprint race of the season at a track they've not been to since 2019. But John, how do you think it went?
I thought it was a good one, actually. I know they were complaining, and the complaints were kind of further thrown out by the fact we had this kind of bitumen treatment. So the teams had rocked up on Wednesday, no warning at all. This kind of treatment to the surface looked like it'd been painted. So grip levels all over the shop, teams out of kilter with preparations. Then we had that strange grass fire, which gave us a little bit of a red flag. But as happens in Formula One, a lot of complaining before something happens, and the teams just get on and do it. Jumbled up grid, thanks to the weather conditions on Friday. I'm so lost as to what day it is anymore. Jumbled up grid, and I thought a pretty good race. I mean, Verstappen got off a bit slow on the kind of used mediums. Battery wasn't working first few laps, but pulled it together and was gone. No one was going to stop him this weekend. But Lewis second place. I think he was delighted. I think it proves that W15, when it works, it's great. But the question is, it doesn't work very often.
And it needs to have unfavourable weather conditions, doesn't it, along the way as well. But JBL, I mean, if you were to say at the start of this one, the top 8 will be predictably the top 8, we knew the cars, we just didn't know the order. Would you have put Lewis Hamilton second of those top 8 at the end of a sprint race?
I think, given what we knew when we watched the race, certainly, but I didn't think that he was going to sort of stay there, without the sort of adverse weather conditions. So it was a surprise to see him sort of cling on to it. It was nice to see because he's obviously never led a lap of a sprint race before, which is a weird statistic, but it's true until now. He hasn't been in the fight for a victory for a very long time as well. So yeah, it was nice to kind of see him on his way. Well, have a decent result in the sprint race, even if everything else didn't go to plan. But I certainly didn't really, well, I think it was very unpredictable anyway, to be honest.
We're going to come to more records in a bit, actually, by the way. I mean, Lando Norris has got this record that some people would say he wouldn't really want, but I think he's probably okay with it at the moment, and that is most podiums and most points in Formula One without a race win. I'm going to come to that with the Grand Prix in a second, but before we get to the Grand Prix, we need to talk about qualifying as well. And it would be remiss of us not really to mention Lewis Hamilton's showing in qualifying didn't get out of Q1, John.
No, it was a mixture that we had new Parc Fermé rules this weekend. So previous sprint weekends, teams do their practice into sprint, into main qualifying, and then the car settings were fixed. The teams didn't like it. Sometimes they'd lock themselves into either a troublesome setup, or like Lewis and Austin last year, you lock yourself into a setup that's running too low, plank gets worn out, disqualified. So they shuffled the order around and opened up Parc Fermé, which allowed you to kind of do some changes between the sprint race and qualifying. So Lewis, having got his second place in the sprint, decided to let's just completely change everything and do it completely differently. Car didn't work as well, didn't have the confidence, bit of a tailwind to turn 14, lock up, and the grid is so tight these days, a couple of temps is the difference between getting through, not getting through, and he was out. I don't think there's been many roller coaster days like a podium in the morning and dumped out of Q1 in the afternoon.
It's also very unlike Lewis Hamilton to make a mistake on a quali lap like that on his main one. You can normally put money on the fact he'd put in a decent banker there, and it was a shame for him to not get out of Q1, particularly because of that lock-up. But JBL looking further afield, and I'm going to jump Q2 and go straight to Q3, and that is that Valtteri Bottas got into Q3 for the Sauber. And how many times are we going to talk about Lance Stroll letting the side down for Aston Martin? He didn't get out of Q2, and his teammate stuck his car on P3.
Yeah, it was a very mixed bag, and as we all know, the old adage goes, well, not old because it's new for this season, but if you beat Lance
Stroll,
adage goes, as the new adage goes, if you beat Lance Stroll, you'll score a point. And the fact that he's not really doing it in qualifying made it a lot easier for Nico Hülkenberg and Valtteri Bottas as well, and Bottas did contend for a point, as I'm sure we'll get into, but instead his car had other ideas. But I just want to circle back to the Parc Fermé rules actually, because I thought that they worked relatively well. It did give teams a second opportunity, a second bite at the cherry to have a go and try and make sure everything was better after what they'd seen in the sprint. But I think it also punished those who got a little bit greedy as well. Those who'd sort of come in on a good setup, had a good sprint race, and they've gone, we can get more out of this, and didn't necessarily go well. So I thought it sort of had an interesting kind of dimension to the weekend. It wasn't just everybody converges and ends up doing well. It did punish a little bit of greediness, I thought. Yeah,
no, I've actually got a sneaky feeling, by the way, that Lance Stroll is going to get a further mention in this little video. But before we get to him, let's talk about the Grand Prix that we witnessed today. All in all, I've got to say, I think that was quite an enjoyable experience to watch. John, was it an enjoyable experience out there?
No, I think this is the kind of the mixed feelings about Formula One these days. Is on the one hand, we should be marvelling at, man and machine, Max Verstappen in that Red Bull, absolutely stunning, at a completely different level. We're seeing things we saw like Lewis Hamilton, Mercedes, Sebastian Vettel in the Red Bull, Michael Schumacher in a Ferrari. This is a peak driver at his best in the best car in the field, and it's magical to watch. But it's not very exciting at times. It's almost the inevitability that even if Max is shuffled down the order like in the sprint, he comes through, walks his way to the front, and disappears. And I think we knew at turn one, the second Fernando, I think he probably had a little sniff of Max at going round the outside at turn one, but hit that kind of less grip that pinged Lando off in the sprint. And once Max was gone, you just knew it was kind of game over for the rest of the field. I don't think so that Max wins everything is the problem. I think just the manner of the way he dominates. He needs to do what Valentino Rossi used to do in MotoGP, and so I'm going to win this, but I'll sit in second for a little while and I'll win it on the final lap. So maybe he can take that approach.
Ignore what he wants to do, still win, but just give us a bit of a spectacle. Just play the game, Max, please. Play the game. Other than Max, then, JBL, further back, I don't really want to paper over Max's achievements, because if he finishes a Grand Prix, he wins the Grand Prix, right? That's pretty much what's going on with Max in a Red Bull at the moment. And you know what? Nico Rosberg said in commentary that he's firmly or swiftly becoming the fifth best ever driver in Formula One. He's getting up that order, really. But his teammate, we do have to focus on Sergio Perez, and we have to focus on Sergio Perez because once again, he didn't bring the car home second, which it's his job. It's his job to bring that RB home, that Red Bull home, in second place. And he couldn't get past or anywhere near Lando Norris, who's in a car that before the Grand Prix, they were saying it was a damage limitation weekend.
Yeah, I think I think the damage was mainly done in the first stint rather than the second, because Verstappen had a very convincing lead without safety cars or anything like that. If you look at Perez's race, for example, losing a position to Alonso at the start and having to expend a little bit of his tyre life to get ahead again, that's something that cost him time to Verstappen. But he just wasn't keeping pace with him, and I think the gap was, by the time we got to about lap 20, which was when the yellow flags initially came out, when Bottas stopped on track, I think he was about 12-13 seconds behind, so he was losing 0.6, 0.7 seconds a lap, which that's a huge amount, if you're considering it lap by lap, and that put him in a position that compromised him later on, because you had that pit stop. Verstappen came in, took his hard tyres, and Perez came in, took his hard tyres. But that put him out behind Norris and Leclerc as well. And if he had been, 4 or 5 seconds closer, maybe he halves that deficit, he gets past Norris if he falls behind, and he finishes P2. So I think he created a situation for himself in the first stint that had knock-on effects for the second. And then battling with Leclerc as well, he just didn't have any tyre life either to attack Norris, and their lap times were pretty much similar throughout the final stint. So I think that's where the genesis is there.
Yeah, and it came down to a race where safety cars and virtual safety cars came into play a huge part of it, and it did have a knock-on effect to Sergio. It also, like you say, threw up a lot of things when it came down to strategy. John, looking at Lando Norris, the 2 safety cars in particular really kind of helped him out. Do you think we'd be looking at a Lando podium at all if it weren't for those safety cars? Do you think it helped him out strategy-wise, or do you think he had the pace?
No, I think he had the pace today, even if it shaked out with no safety cars on standard form. I think McLaren had the edge on Ferrari here. We know the Aston Martin is quick on a Saturday and struggles on Sunday, and that's a characteristic they're trying to dial out. Fernando was expecting to, drift steadily backwards. So I think Ferrari had a massive struggle on the hard tyre here. They don't particularly understand what the problem was, why there was this disconnect between how the medium performed in the hard. So I think, irrespective of what it shakes out, no safety car, no interventions. It should have been Max, Sergio, probably Lando. So I think Lando, did benefit from it. But a great drive on the weekend. They came into, as you said, thinking it would be damage limitation, thinking the slow speed corners here would punish them. But actually, cars looks really strong, probably even stronger than Suzuka. And we're going to Miami, where they've got some upgrades coming, so could start seeing a little bit of momentum behind McLaren now, which is great news.
JBL, looking at the safety cars then, before we get to that, I was watching, and Valtteri Bottas was outside of his car. He was reaching in, he was putting his wheel back on, his steering wheel back on, and he kept glancing up the track as cars were flying towards him. Yes, under the yellow flags, they were slower, but I don't like to see those sights anymore. There's something I want, just virtual safety car it straight away. If there's a driver out the car on a braking zone, why are they taking risks like that still?
Your guess is as good as mine. I completely agree. One of the things I like to do if I'm sort of doing a feature or something for Autosport is sometimes I'll delve into the archive of videos to watch old races, and you see a lot of old things like that where, even like 1999, 2000, you had a car stopped on the side of the track and they just leave it there and sort of like wave it off, and that was apparently good enough. And it does sort of make you sort of clench a little bit, because you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, like, we're going to see something bad here. So I think ultimately it's just a weird miscommunication. I think they kind of thought it would be all right. But because the car's stuck in gear, it's going to take a lot longer to clear up. So yeah, it's just not something you want to see. You kind of want to see that sort of swift. You don't want to see an overreaction, certainly, but you want to see sort of swift action being taken. There's a situation down that corner, VSC it off and get on, and then assess later on what you can do with a safety car, for example. It's better to err on the side of caution, because, even though Formula One's very safe these days, you just can't take that risk. You really can't.
Yeah, luckily everyone was okay, apart from Valtteri not finishing the race. I mean, he was looking pretty good this weekend, and Sauber were having a decent-ish weekend for themselves as well. But let's just stick with the more front runners for a bit and stay with Ferrari and McLaren. I think going into this weekend, JBL, it looked like, McLaren were saying damage limitations, and Ferrari probably could have expected to have done a fair bit better. You can't do much better than they did, but certainly would have been expecting to finish ahead of both of those McLarens.
Yeah, I think it's just the sort of the nature of this weekend being a lot different to what we expected, and I think that's a lot of condition changes, that bitumen layer that sort of turned up unexpectedly, and that's given everybody it confounded their expectations a little bit. And I think we were expecting quite a cold race, a struggle to build up a bit of tyre temp, and then getting to that point where you're sliding around a bit and you're dealing with front graining. I think that's what we were expecting. And it just didn't really pan out like that. In those situations, you would expect Ferrari to have a little bit of an edge. That never really materialised. McLaren, damage limitation, expecting low-speed corners, expecting the longer radius corners to, cause them a lot of grief. That didn't seem to happen this weekend either. So it's interesting to see that all of these F1 teams, they've got all of these simulation tools and have an idea about their car and what they can expect, and then suddenly they turn up and actually everything's kind of okay. So it was an odd one for those kind of expecting certain things to happen, expecting Ferrari to kind of tighten its stranglehold over second in the championship. It just didn't quite work out like that.
Yeah, and as we said a bit earlier on, it didn't work out for Mercedes, it didn't work out for Lewis Hamilton from his starting position on the grid way back in 18th. He did climb up the order and finish 9th, John. But looking at Mercedes, they're now 90-something points, 91 points, is it, behind, 99 points behind Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship at the moment. I mean, what's going wrong with Mercedes and why can't they get this fixed?
I think the car hasn't made the step forward they hoped for. I think it's as simple as that. I think they also probably felt around Saudi Arabia time that low speed, medium speed performance was there. It was high speed performance lacking. They chased that. They had this new setup direction in Japan, trying to kind of better balance the front tyre temperatures and rear tyre temperatures. Got the car in a nice window through the S's, was very, very quick. But while they improved that, these ground effect cars are so complicated. So you move into one window and suddenly they've lost their low speed performance, and medium speed performance isn't as good. So I think that they're kind of battling between these two compromises, which is quite difficult to get sorted. But I think ultimately, and I think George Russell mentioned this evening when we spoke to him in the pen, this is now just about ultimate pure performance. This car needs more downforce. It needs upgrades. It needs development. They need to make progress in delivering just more performance. This isn't about suddenly finding a magical setup solution that's going to give them the step that puts them behind Red Bull. It's going to be new parts, improvements, stuff coming out the wind tunnel. And they've got a step, they say, coming from Miami. So we'll see if they can inch forwards a little bit.
Inch forward they need to do. Now, JBL, you were saying a little bit earlier on that this new adage of if you beat Stroll, then you'll get some points. And today, Lance Stroll took himself out of the race, but it was a very bizarre incident. So, JBL, if you can explain to us kind of what happened on that restart with Lance Stroll, Daniel Ricciardo as well, and then John, just a heads up, I'm going to come to you to find out what Lance Stroll has said about this, because I imagine he's been quite vocal. But JBL, first of all, go for it.
Let me set the scene, Bryn. It's hard to do this without a visual medium. But well, obviously, towards the end of that first safety car, everybody's bunched up at turn 14. Verstappen's backing up the pack. You have Norris, Perez, and the Ferraris kind of in close pursuit. And you have this little gap between Sainz and Alonso. And Alonso kind of, I think he misjudges the speed at which everybody's going. Everybody's going very, very slowly through that final corner, locks up, and Russell and Piastri kind of get very, very close behind him as well. Then you have Ricciardo kind of steam in. I think he's caught a little bit off guard, and he does what he can to lift off and get on the brakes. He was very close behind Piastri anyway. Think he just about got away with it. Piastri had a little bit of damage to his diffuser, but Ricciardo, did what he could. But then you have Stroll kind of barrel in almost, and you watch his onboard, and he's looking at his eyes are on the apex of the corner. He's not really looking at Ricciardo, and that was something that Ricciardo found very irksome. It just went straight into the back of him, and I think half of Ricciardo's diffuser was destroyed. It was just a little bit of, it was carnage, really. It was just kind of amateurish. You're expecting that kind of situation on cold tyres when everyone's trying to sort of jockey for position just before the restart. You know what to expect. So it was a proper old school brain fade moment from Stroll. And that was kind of how it played out. So yeah, really strange one.
Go on then, John. What has Lance Stroll said about this?
Well, he blamed everyone else, of course. He said that everything just concertinaed in front of him and he had nowhere to go. It's as simple as that, which to a point is correct, because I think it's one of those standard motorway shunts, isn't it, that someone brakes like 15 cars in front and it shuffles back and everyone brakes harder and harder and harder. Eventually, two cars, their velocity means they're going to have an impact. So I think that's what happened. But equally, behind the safety car, everyone's kind of jostling a little bit. Everyone's braking, accelerating, trying to put everybody else off. So you kind of should have expected it. He got the penalty, and that was it.
JBL, he said very soon on the radio, he got straight on the radio and started pointing fingers about brake checking, brake testing. That's somewhat disappointing to have, an elite racing driver finger pointing straight away and saying somebody deliberately made me drive into the back of them. Thoughts?
I think it wasn't the right assessment, certainly. I don't know if he thinks if he was watching something completely different. Obviously, as I said, he was kind of had his head pointed towards the apex and clearly didn't really have much awareness of kind of what was going on. Didn't really kind of have the forethought to go, everyone's kind of bunched up. Let me back out of this. Let me pull a little bit to the right hand side. Let me just make sure that I'm safe and I'm not a danger to anybody else. It just seemed to, I don't know. He just let things happen and then conveniently sort of sort out for the excuse afterwards. And you should be taking kind of responsibility for your own actions. I mean, as a Formula One driver, everybody can put a car together and you're racing against other drivers, but ultimately you're the one in control. You're the one behind the steering wheel. And sometimes I think I genuinely believe he forgets that sometimes.
I want to move on to the other person that was involved in that one. You've mentioned Daniel Ricciardo. He doesn't have much luck, does he, Daniel Ricciardo? I mean, when things are going well for him, that happens to him. So, John, thoughts on this one very quickly, because Daniel Ricciardo seemed to have a pretty decent weekend, qualified 12th, way ahead of his teammate as well, which is good to see from Daniel Ricciardo's point of view, obviously. But he had a new chassis. So are the early signs that Daniel Ricciardo's discovered his mojo somewhere in the back of his wardrobe?
Yeah, I think so. I think those signs have been there for a while. That I think there's been a lot of noise from outside, potentially fueled by Liam Lawson fans that Daniel's under pressure and he's about to get dropped, which the team says not correct at all. They see Daniel's situation similar to kind of Carlos Sainz at the start of 22, when he was struggling with a car, couldn't get comfortable with it. Took 6-7 races to get on top of it, and that's what they see of Daniel. They've been chipping away. And they say the signs have been there. They saw progress in Saudi Arabia, Australia, without the track limits. He would have been right up there. Japan qualified really well, but we didn't see the race pace because he got caught up in that crash with Alex. And this weekend's been his most complete performance. They reckon he was well on for points here. And then through absolutely zero fault of his own, gets hit by Lance, and he's just picked up a 3-place grid penalty for the next race because of a safety car infringement, overtaking Hülkenberg. So classic Daniel Ricciardo luck sometimes, but the teams behind him, they see progress. I think it's too early to judge if the chassis made a difference. The team thinks there was nothing in it, but equally I think racing drivers sometimes, they're so complicated in their feel of everything that sometimes I think they can, if they know it's a new chassis, something in their head will tell them that it's an improvement. So I think it's fair to say he's felt more comfortable this weekend. Is it setup? Is it car? Or is it new chassis? I think the final answer will come in maybe 3 or 4 races.
Yeah, it doesn't ever rain for him, does it? It seems to pour. So not only does he get shunted to the back of the grid and have a DNF, but he gets a 3-place grid penalty for overtaking Nico Hülkenberg under the safety car. And quickly on Hülkenberg, JBL, he's getting points. He's collecting points. One here, one here, one here. He's doing really well. And Haas seem to have had a bit of a turnaround over the last few months.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's all a legacy of spending a lot of time on working out what his main weakness was last season, trying to address it in testing, being very, very diligent. Because as much as we love watching drivers go for kind of fast lap times in testing, because then you kind of get, we get to kind of see their qualifying pace, it doesn't really matter doing it. What matters is putting your car through loads of different conditions, basically doing all of the work that people think is probably from the outside really boring. But for Haas, it's worked out. They didn't chase times in testing. They just spent a lot of time working on tyre degradation weaknesses, putting, the suspension through different setups and kind of assessing what effects it has on the tyres, that kind of thing. Just like, good old-fashioned sort of hard graft, really. And it seems to have paid off. And the fact that the car's much improved over last season, it just means that Hülkenberg can put it in a place where he can qualify very well, which he did last season. But then you have the added extra of him not having to race for 3 laps, then having to back off by about 5 seconds a lap because the tyres are already going off. So that's the upside there. And it's really working out for Haas this season.
But it's also interesting to see what Haas have done, isn't it, JBL? Because they've really bucked the trend. They brought quite a lot of upgrades to a sprint weekend. A lot of teams don't seem to want to bring their big upgrades to sprint weekends because they have so little testing. And it's a back-to-back sprint weekend with Miami coming up in 2 weeks' time. So they've bucked the trend, and it seemed to have worked for them to some degree.
Yeah, and it's a difficult time because usually I think previously, where with the way the calendar was, you'd have your first 3 or 4 flyaways, then you'd start in the European rounds and get your sort of first big update package on. Now we've just finished round 5, and then Miami's after that. So it's not until Imola that we get to Euro rounds where everything's really easy to just sort of like bring along, because you just pack it in a truck and unpack it a few hours later. So yeah, the logistics are different. It is a risk taking it to a sprint race, but it just shows that Haas isn't going through the situation it went through last season, where it waited until Austin for an upgrade package that didn't really work. It shows that there's been genuinely some degree of turnaround in the team, whether it's mentality, whether it's a sort of tacit admission that the last few years haven't gone very well and they need to change approach. It just seems to they're just quietly going on about their business, and it kind of vindicates, I think, the decisions made with management at the end of last year.
Another team, John, that have brought an upgrade, and that's Alpine, the A524 lighter. They've given it to Esteban Ocon for this one. I think that they're going to bring the second one to Miami. So things seem to be moving in the right direction, or is it too early to tell from Alpine's point of view, almost in the points from China?
Yeah, well, I think I said to Esteban yesterday, I think it's just chipping away, basically. That considering where they started so far on the back foot in Bahrain, we all expect them to be at the back, and they were at the back, and it looked pretty bleak. But I think there's just steady improvements of updates, bringing weight off the car, understanding the weaknesses a bit more, coping with them, and they've just knuckled down and they've just got on with it. Still a long way to go. They're still nowhere near where they want to be and where they should be for a works team. But I think steadily getting on there. I don't think we'll see them by the end of the year, being in that lead pack. I think they're firmly entrenched in that, the kind of the rear 5 teams who are battling for that 1 point. But slightly better situation than it started the season, I think it's fair to say.
Well, at least it's good to see another team competing anyway, whether it's for a point or not, at least in the bunch of 5. We shall have to wait and see what happens with Alpine. Finally then, chaps, what do we think of China? Did it deliver, JBL?
I think it's nice to see the circuit back after 5 years off the calendar, actually, which is a long time. I think it was a decent race. Is it the best one of the season? I don't know. I think Australia was a bit better from a slightly different winner standpoint. But, I think it was a decent return to the calendar. I thought it brought a lot in terms of, the difficulty of the circuit. Did we get the sort of weird tyre graining race that we were promised? Not really. And it did sort of fall a little bit flat in the latter stages, but I think it's a solid 5 out of 10 for sure.
God, that's a solid 5. I thought you were going to give it a 3 with that. Blimey. Okay, I can't wait to see a 6 out of 10. John, what about you? I mean, you were there and you got to experience it in the flesh with a Chinese driver on the grid as well. Every time Zhou went down the start-finish straight, the grandstand seemed to erupt.
Yeah, I think, not the greatest of races this season, not the brilliant of spectacles and the fantastic. We want a powerhouse victory at the front. We want Red Bull v Ferrari v Mercedes v McLaren v Aston Martin all battling it out wheel to wheel, and the race would have been decided in the final lap, so we didn't get that. But I think the event worked because of the crowd, that it was a massively engaged audience here, really, really enthusiastic. And one of the quirks of being at the race is that, and you probably don't realise at home, is that the TV images are out of sync with the real world. So obviously when you're at home you don't notice it's 10 seconds behind everything else, but here at the track I think we're about 5 seconds behind, so we'd be sat in the media centre which is above the grandstand, and hear the cheers of everything happening, which they could see out on track, and then we'd have to wait to see what they were cheering at on the TV images. But generally it was Zhou doing an overtaking move, any other overtaking move, and there seemed to be a lot of hilarity also in the media centre at the way Bottas is on board, like he drove straight off the track and stopped in a runoff area. I think the journalists in here absolutely loved it. So they're enthusiastic. What more do we want?
That's part of the battle, isn't it? Enthusiasm is part of the battle. Look, gents, thank you very much indeed. Here is how the championship looks then after 5 rounds. 5 rounds already in 2024. It's Max Verstappen leading the way. Unsurprisingly, if he finishes the race, he seems to win the race, doesn't he? He's ahead of Sergio Perez, his teammate, just behind him. They've got the 2 Ferraris, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, squabbling for 3rd overall, aren't they? Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri in 5th and 6th. Then George Russell, the Mercedes, in 7th. Alonso 8th. Lewis Hamilton way down there in 9th. And Lance Stroll in 10th place. Tsunoda still there in 11th. Oliver Behrman still respectably in 12th place, even though he's only ever finished 1 Grand Prix. Then it's Hülkenberg and the rest, all the way down to Logan Sargent. The Constructors' Championship, well, that looks like this, and it is Red Bull Racing pulling away now from Ferrari in 2nd place. McLaren on 96 points, some way back from Ferrari. Mercedes are way back from them, 52 points for Mercedes now, and Aston Martin some 12 points dropping off from the Mercedes. Starting to get some field spread, aren't we, in the Constructors? All the way down there in last place, it is Sauber. Well, guys, thank you very much for joining me. John over there in China and JBL here in the UK. We've got a couple of weeks off before our next Grand Prix. We're heading to Miami. Oh, yes, the first of 3 Grand Prix held in the United States of America. If you like what you've seen, don't forget to subscribe and keep up to date with everything happening in Formula 1, and check out all the written content at autosport.com as well. Until the next video, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.